Well, hello, hello. Hi, ACUHO-I. Good afternoon. Good morning, depending on what time zone you're joining us from. We are so glad that you've carved out some time for some professional development via this webinar. We are very excited to share with you this content that has been many years in the making. But before I turn things over to our presenters, I just want to go over a couple housekeeping announcements. First and foremost about this Zoom platform. The closed caption has been enabled. So if you're wanting to have access to that, go ahead and make sure you enable that on your screens at the bottom with the little indicator marked CC. For today's program, yes, absolutely. Please use the chat. We'd like to know where you're zooming in from. Any reactions that you have, please feel free to use that reaction feature of the Zoom window at the bottom of your screen with the heart. You can like things, applaud things. We want to know what's on your mind as an attendee. And for questions, if you have a quick question, yes, you can put it in the chat. But for more in-depth questions, we're encouraging you to use the Q&A panel. That is also at the bottom of your Zoom screen where you'll see a little question mark. From there, you can actually type in your question, and then you as the attendees, you can upvote certain questions. If you see a question that you're like, wow, that was a great question, I have that too. Go ahead and upvote that. That lets us know what questions might be on more than one person's mind. So that we will do some direct answering of those at the end of the program, about the last 10 minutes or so. Today's program is being recorded. You'll find it pretty much immediately after today's session, available via the ACUHO-I YouTube channel. Don't forget about that resource. There's all sorts of great recordings and programmings on the ACUHO-I YouTube channel, and this program will be there as well. You'll also find it later posted via the ACUHO-I online community. So if that's your best source that you often view and engage in the online community, you'll find that via the library. And then also you'll find the slides from today's program also in the ACUHO-I library. So lots of good resources there too to keep in mind. All right, well, that's enough for me. I know we have lots to cover today. So with that, I'm going to turn things over to James Bauman, who is on staff at ACUHO-I and really help facilitate and lead this project from the staff side. And then he's going to introduce our other presenter. James?
Oh, thank you very much, Emily. Again, my name is James Bauman. I'm the publications director for ACUHO-I, and I've spent the last couple months working with Amanda and her team of volunteers to get the much anticipated standards and competencies into the format that's best for sharing with everybody and beginning to put it to use. Hopefully you've seen the announcement as we rolled this out over the last week or so. I'm going to keep this really short because again we have a lot to get to today. Again, there will be time for Q&A at the end, so we'll make sure to save some time for that. When we get going, I will put a link to where you can download the actual document from the online community if you have not done so already. I think at last time I checked, more than 350 people have downloaded it already, so we're really excited about that. And again, I'm going to be keeping my eye on the Q&A. I'll chime in where necessary. But again, Amanda Knurr from Ball State University, she's our expert. And so I'm going to keep my mouth shut, and I'm going to let her share all the great work and information that's included in here. So take it away, Amanda.
Excellent. Good afternoon, everyone, and thanks, James. As he said, my name is Amanda Knurr, and I currently have the pleasure of serving as the Associate Vice President for Student Affairs and Director of Housing and Residence Life at Ball State University. And this is a project that we have been working on for several years now, so we are so thrilled to get to roll this out to all of you today. As we go through today, I'm going to be talking about where we were, the journey we went through to do this revision, and then we're going to unveil the new characteristics of the new competencies and standards, and also talk about some strategies or some ways in which we hope that they'll be used by you all, the membership, in the years to come. I do also want to say that while we're going to be talking about this journey, we also very much want for you to give feedback, to give questions as you are downloading this document and digging into it. If you have questions, concerns, if you see a gap, If you want to ask, like, why was this put here instead of there, please reach out to us. As we continue to go down this path, we want to make sure that we are being responsive in future revisions to what the membership is saying as they start utilizing these tools to improve their program and services. So to get started, James, if you want to move on to the next slide here, I'm going to start off by talking about why are we working on the standards? Why is that important to us as an association? And then we'll talk through the journey we went through to do the revision, and then what is the content? What is the framework that we used to guide our approach? What I want to say, first of all, when you talk about setting standards, I want to talk about what it is not. Sometimes people will look at our professional standards and competencies and say, well, that's accreditation. I have to measure my program up to prove that it's worthwhile, to prove that, we have hit a certain threshold. And that is not the purpose of the competencies and standards at all. In fact, the standards are really to inform and to be a part of continuous improvement for departments. Is to be able to look at your own work, your own department, and say, how are we lining up to what might be best practices, and where might be some areas where we have a really strong area in our program, and where might be some areas where we want to focus some attention where we're not quite delivering the results that we want to deliver as an institution or as a campus. So it's really meant to guide that assessment, to guide that reflection, and then to help you put a program in place of continuous improvement so you can deliver for your students, for your constituents, exactly what you wanted to deliver for them. I have also found that the standards can be helpful if you are trying to advocate for a particular need on your campus. I need an additional staff member. I need an additional unit. We need to set up our budget differently. It provides national best practices that you can use to assess where you are, and then to say, this is where we need to get, and this is why it's important. So it really can be utilized for advocacy for you as you're trying to further develop and support and request for the needs that you have on your campus. So again, we want you to understand what are the best practices, how do you assess that, how you develop a program of continuous improvement, and then how you identify those program strengths and areas for growth. Now, why look at competencies, and what are the differences between standards and competencies? Standards are really going to be focused at the program or department level. What are you doing as a program in operations and facilities and dining and conferences and that work itself? Competencies are really directed at the individual staff members. Competencies are about the knowledge, the skills, the behaviors that your team has, or what the skills that they need in order to be successful in their roles within your housing and residence life program. So competencies tend to be used to inform performance reviews and set expectations and goals. They can be used individually to assess your own skill set and then map out where you want to grow and the areas you want to grow in the future. They can help you identify areas for professional development and training for your team. And it can also make sure that your department goals and the types of training you're getting and the skill development you're doing with your team are aligned. So if you're really struggling with crisis management and your standards and your programs, then it makes sense to really start focusing on developing the skills and the competencies of your employees so they're able to develop the program in that particular area. So competencies, behaviors, skills, and attitudes of your team. Standards are really those things for the program. What is the program doing, and how is it impacting success, students, the campus, and the community? Why are we integrating them? I think the biggest reason we're integrating them is, again, if you're doing a great program, but your team doesn't have the skills to deliver it, your program is going to suffer. On the other end, if you have great staff who have great skills and experiences, but you don't have the structure in place to have a good program, the whole experience is going to suffer. So by integrating the two, you can really see what are those programs, what are those standards, what are those areas I need to focus on from a developmental level with the overall program, and then how do I help build the skill set of my team? How do I hire the right skill set so that I can create the structure and the format to implement the program that I want? So that integration is really, really important. So let's talk a little bit about growth and development. Integrating those standards and competencies is really about being developmental and is about a journey, not a destination. We're hopeful that these standards and competencies are something that you're going to pull out regularly throughout your year. It's not something you're going to do once every 4 years when you're required to do an external review. You're going to look at these things, circle a number, and have people tell you what you're doing well or you're not doing well. We're really hopeful that as you're in July and you're meeting with your leadership team about what are we going to do the next year, that you're pulling these up to really look at your program and say, where do we want to focus this year? Where do we want to continue to evolve? Where are some areas where we just don't feel like we're hitting the mark? We hope that you're going to be utilizing these competencies as you map out the curriculum for your professional and graduate team members. That you're going to say, what do we need to hit in training before the semester starts? What are we going to do each week in staff meetings to really develop these skills? So we want that to be a process, a journey, not something that hits once or twice a year. We want us to be able to communicate not only what we're doing, but why we're doing it and how we're integrating it. So the standards and the competencies give us as a profession, and then us in our department, specific and consistent language that we can use with each other, that we can use across campuses to really help guide our conversations and our work. And so that we can better advocate at an institution, a region, and a national and an international level of the work that we do, because we're using those consistent standards, we're using those consistent languages and skill sets. It provides some holistic work too. It's a holistic approach to the work that we're doing. So that's a little bit about standards, competencies, what they are. Let's kind of go back and we're going to talk about how did we get to the today? How did we get to this new revision process? And it really was a journey. So I'm going to go back a little bit. And before I even talk about where did we go originally, let me tell you how I got involved in this process. Probably about 5 years ago, I was chair of the professional standards committee. And that committee group every year went through our existing professional standards and said, we've got to review them and revise them. And after going through this process a couple years, I noticed a couple of things. The first thing I noticed is that that our profession had evolved significantly since we initially wrote the standards in 1984. We added things like P3, diversity, equity, inclusion language, affinity groups, crisis management, behavior intervention, curriculum. All these terms had really evolved since the initial standards were published in 1984. But we had not done significant revisions. And so language was literally being kind of band-aided, if you will. Like we would go through, we'd update some language, but we really didn't do a thorough review or addition to those professional standards. And so there are areas that were starting to feel really disconnected with each other. At the same time, we were getting ready to launch the Futures of Profession Task Force, which we'll talk about here in a couple of minutes. And so there was some talk about what is the future of the profession? Where are we at? Where were we? What's the future? And so we started having some conversations, and they said, why don't you put a proposal together to do a complete review of the professional standards? So as I started to write this proposal, somebody said to me, well, what are you doing with the body of knowledge? And I'm like, what's the body of knowledge? And they're like, well, here's this document here too that's all about competencies for skills. And I'm like, what? They're not together, are they? And we found that this body of knowledge, the professional competencies document, was written separate from the standards. So we have all these departmental expectations, these program expectations, and then we had all these competencies and standards for professionals. And we found those topical areas, the language didn't always align. Sometimes there was different language used. Sometimes they were organized or structured differently. Sometimes something was talked about in a standards and it wasn't mentioned at all in the competency document. Sometimes it was mentioned in the competency document and you couldn't find it in the standards. And so we started to realize, wow, if we're going to talk about the skills that our professionals need, we probably need to connect them to the professional standards. So we ended up putting a proposal together to say, let's look at both of these documents and figure out if we need to rewrite them both or if we need to integrate them or what do we need to do to bring the standards and the competencies to today's profession. At this point, we are right around the time of COVID. And so, as you know, all of the work that we did was kind of thrown up in the air, and life completely changed during COVID, and things that we never had to think about and the ways in which we did work completely got adjusted and changed. That really gave us an interesting opportunity to completely, as a committee, rethink the work that we were doing, to rethink how we set all of this up. As we did this proposal, as it got approved, a call was sent out to the entire association to say, hey, we'd like some experts to come together to talk about what the standards and the competencies might be like. How we might do this revision. We selected, I don't know, about 15 or 20 people, including some international representatives, because we wanted to really have that global perspective. And we started to talk about what are those things that are most important to us in our profession? How has our profession evolved? What do we need to think about? What sorts of things do we need to look at as we start to look at revising our standards? So we talked about things like, you know what? Back in 1984, many of us weren't managing IT. We weren't managing res networks. We weren't talking about Wi-Fi. We weren't talking about social media or artificial intelligence. We started talking about P3s, and most of the time back then, we weren't talking about privatized housing. We weren't talking about privatized dining in the same way. So what does that look like? What were some other things that came up? We weren't in a global organization in 1984 like we are now. So how do we make sure that our language is globalized? And then the last thing we talked about is um, the vendors that we're working with as an association. And there was a time where it often felt, at least to me as a member, like we kind of kept the vendors at arm's length. We've got to work with you, but you're kind of the enemy and you're kind of the ally. Like, what do we need to do? And as we started having conversations with the committee, we had some vendors on the committee that said, you know what? I just really wish that housing professionals would know X. Or I really wish that you all realize that you do this and you're missing the mark here. So we started to talk too about our vendors and how they were able to hold up a mirror to us in ways that we maybe collectively couldn't do ourselves. So those were the conversations we started to have as we started thinking about revision and revising these standards. At the same time, separate from our group, the association was launching the Futures of the Profession Task Force. And this group was really charged with thinking about where a profession is going to be headed, where is it going to be, and then how do we think strategically about the tools, the resources, the advocacy, the training that we need to have for our membership so that we're prepared for the future that's going to be arriving at our doorstep any moment. And so there was a group of people that came together and created sort of 8 questions that ended up being topical areas. And they're on your screen now. Things like, what is the future of facility design and maintenance for housing? How do we enable workforce sustainability? This is right in the middle, right after COVID, right? People are leaving and mass exodus of housing professionals. How do we have workforce sustainability? What are we thinking differently about? Our occupancy is different. We had to send people home for a semester. So what is the business model? And so that group really started thinking about that. And after they did their questions, they started exploring, they did their discovery report. And then these sub-working groups started developing resources and tools. While they were doing all this work, we had gotten far enough along that we're like, oh my goodness, there's going to be some overlap. There's going to be some work that comes out of the Futures of the Profession Task Force that's going to impact our standards and competencies. So we need to really wait for them to catch up before we move ahead too much further. So our competencies and standards group paused for about 6 months to a year while the Futures of the Profession work really finished their work so that we could really use that document, use those resources and tools to also help guide our revision of the standards and competencies. So the Futures of the Profession was happening. In addition, every several years, the Council for the Advancement of Standards reviews the Housing and Residence Life dining standards. So while we're doing all this work, CAS was doing the review of housing and residence life standards. So we're like, great time to make sure we're aligning our work together. The Program Review Collaborative was just getting launched, which is a program, a consortium of different associations that will send external reviewers into your campus to do a review for you. And so how do we utilize those resources in this work? The Student Affairs Certification Consortium was being developed. And so there was a team of people that were developing the certification standards, the certification exam questions. And we're like, whoa, we got to make sure that as we develop our standards and our competencies, that it's in alignment with what we're asking for folks who are going to be certified in these standards. So we were pulling those things in. Nationally, how we're delivering residential education was blowing up. LLCs were happening differently. The Residential College Symposium has grown. The residential curriculum approach, the approach out of Texas. There's a lot of different curricular type of residential education delivery mechanisms that were changing. So we said we got to think about how that's changing our programs, our standards, the way in which we train our team, and the type of skills we need from our team members. Again, coming out of COVID, the anti-racism task force was being developed. And so how do we pull that in? And then finally, global perspectives. Up until this point in time, we were like, well, what we want to do is here's the standards. And if you're in Australia, then you just need to tweak those standards to make sure it fits your campus. If you're in Europe, well, hopefully you can use some of this stuff, but we know it's really US centric language, but good luck, try to adapt it. And so as we started to go through this, we're like, we really need to make sure we're trying to adjust our language so it is broad enough that anyone in any of our member organizations can look at, pick it up and say, this is helpful for my team, but yet specific enough that you can apply it readily. So how you use it global enough, but still be significant and specific enough for your campus context. So after many, many months of trying to figure out where do we put this all together, we finally landed on a template to guide our work. And that template was really merging the standards, merging the competencies together so that you could look at it from a departmental lens and then translate it directly into how we train our staff, how we assess our staff, how we determine the job descriptions, and how we determine what we need to hire our staff. We also decided we needed to add some different areas, some different components. We talked extensively about DEI and how do we integrate it in all of our standards, yet still highlight it as one of our values. And then how do we take all of our current campus climates and take that into effect, knowing that there are campuses that particularly around some of our DEI language aren't allowed or permitted to do some of that work right now. So how do we manage that? We talked about how do we honor our P3 colleagues? How do we honor the type of work that's being done in P3s and embrace that? And then finally, we talked about how do we balance our own standards and competencies and then use the standards and competencies of our sister organizations. So to what depth do we need to go to in some areas and where do we need to refer out to other resources? So let me give you an example. When we think about housing and residence life, as a senior housing officer on my campus, I have facilities, I have business operations, I have some IT, and I have the Res Learn piece, but I don't oversee dining on my campus at all. But my colleague up the road as a senior housing officer does oversee dining, and they're part of our association. So when we look at the dining standards, how much depth do we need to put on that? And or how much do we need to say, here's the base level that we need to do for our association, but if you're really drilling into dining expertise, you need to go over to NACOFs and look at their standards, their competencies. So we talked a lot about what's the depth that we want to go to and where do we need to refer out for specific expertise. We did the same thing with our facilities pieces. Where do we need to dig in, and then where do we need to refer out to our APA association and our APA standards as a sister organization that can really drill deep in an area of expertise. NACUHO-I, all of those sorts of things. And then how do we really make sure that we're setting things up so there's a global component, global language. It's not specifically US centric when we're talking about compliance, ADA language, federal law and executive order language. How do we make it specific to all of our campuses? What language do we need to use? So let's talk about leveraging those standards and competencies. We're going to talk about how the document is set up, show you the breakdown of that, and then how we're going to use it. So the document that you can download has three different areas. The first area is the standards. Those are going to be in bold. And those are things that can be applied broadly across all of our institutions. They're what I would call essential elements or essential components in order to have a successful campus housing program that supports student success and growth, that's fiscally responsible, and that's honoring the integrity and mission of your institution. They really represent the best practices of our profession and should be able to be applied of institutions of all sizes and types, public, private, research one, religiously affiliated, global institutions, multi-campus campuses. There should be things we are aspiring after. Now, again, even in those, like you might look at the dining standards and say, I don't have dining. Put those aside then. But if you did have dining, these are some of the broad essential components your program should have. The guidelines then you'll often find in italics, and those are things that are aspirational or might be context specific practices. So you might say, I'm in a small private college. I am a department of me as a director, an assistant director, and one live-in staff member. I cannot do all of these things. And so you might say, you know what, these guidelines are really great. I just don't have the staff for them, so I'm going to put them aside because I just can't meet them. The guidelines might be things that you're going to say, in my particular state, by law, I'm not permitted to dig into this particular guideline. So why I value it or why it might be something I would aspire after at this point in time, I need to put this aside because for my particular context, we just can't do that. So there are things that you should think about, you can consider, but they might be influenced by your institutional, your departmental, or your state or local culture or the legal environment. So look at them, pay attention for them, but just know they may not be an essential element at your particular campus. And then that third piece are professional competencies. What are the knowledge, the skills, and behaviors that your professionals need in that particular area to demonstrate success and to build a program that's going to be able to exemplify those areas listed in the standards section? All right, so document components. Those are the three areas. Let's go on to the next slide and talk about competencies. So then when you talk about professional competencies, those are the behaviors, skills, and knowledge of the individuals in order to meet the departmental program needs. We further divided those competencies into two areas. The first are skill set. What are those behaviors or actions that employees need to be able to do effectively? What do they need to do? And then the knowledge are what is the information, the facts, the data, the understanding, and the decision making abilities that they need to have that is going to play into the behavior, the choices around behavior. So, what is the knowledge I need? I'm going to need to know what are our cleaning procedures for our facilities? How are we going to clean those bathrooms? Because I can't actually go and clean a toilet if I don't understand, if I don't have the knowledge of what our cleaning procedures are, I can't actually physically go and clean the bathrooms appropriately. So what are the knowledge that we need? And then how do we display that knowledge into behavior? So we split those things out. Then within those competencies, we've got the skills or behaviors and the knowledge, and then we divided that into three categories. The three categories are what is direct service function areas. So for example, our custodians who are cleaning bathrooms and interacting regularly with students, our graduate assistants who are supervising student staff that are every day in our building interacting with students tend to be direct service function. They're not just entry level because there might be folks at mid-level or people who have been in the field for 15 years that are still in direct service functions. But those are functions where they're really connected to students or professionals or developing direct service task-specific activities. The mid-level, the mid-function area is what we call our management function. Those are folks who are kind of going back and forth between I'm doing direct service and I'm managing folks who are making strategy decisions. I'm taking the strategy and I'm implementing it into leadership and helping our direct service folks get their jobs done. So these are the individuals who are overseeing projects, who are overseeing operations. They might be supervising the staff doing direct service functions. And so they might be within our housing department, or in some places, they might be really closely linked with their housing department. These are the folks doing supervision, training, education, management, some of those sorts of roles. And then our third area are really competencies for those folks that are doing strategy and policy formation. So these are the folks that are thinking about the 30,000-foot level. What's happening nationally, and how do I bring that information into policies that are impact how we do our work? How am I making decisions around budget prioritization? How am I planning for our facilities, capital improvement plans using strategy? So there's strategic plans, policies, goals. How are we connecting the work of our department with the rest of the division, the rest of the campus, and across the country? So these folks are doing broad political, broad aspirational, and broad division level type of work. So let me give you some examples. If you look at our competencies of custodial operations, so thinking about how we clean our facilities, our folks in direct service operations, probably the folks that we might call custodians, cleaning staff, tech service staff, some of the skills that they need are to be able to follow cleaning protocols. How do I go in and clean this particular bathroom? What is the process for emptying out a room and turning it over for summer conferences? What are the cleanliness levels that I need to meet when my supervisor comes in to check my work? Those are the skills we want to see. The knowledge that they need, or what are the protocols that my campuses use for each room? Where are the material safety data sheet stored at, and how do I go look at them if I need them when I'm interacting with chemicals? At the management level, it's, okay, how do I develop a flow so that our custodial time on task is maximized? What are the process and procedures I need to develop to train our new custodians on our cleaning protocols? And when you think about knowledge level, some of the things that they need to know are, what are our custodial service levels? How often do bathrooms need cleaned versus public spaces versus room turnover? How many staff am I going to need in order to hit that custodial service level? And then at our strategy level, we need to say, what are APA standards? And in our campus, based on the budget that I have, what is the APA standard that I want to hit? And then how do I make sure that our organization is structured in order to hit that, so that my management people can put that into place? What are the campus politics, so that if I need to advocate for more money to put that APA level into place, that I can do that, right? So that's strategy, management, direct service function. I want to say one more time, a lot of times people look at those three levels and think entry level, mid level, and strategy level. And I want to encourage you, please don't go there. And I say that because even myself, sitting in a senior housing officer role, there are times as I'm flipping through the standards where I might say, in this particular standard, in this moment in time, I'm really operating in a direct service function, or I'm operating in mid-level management, or a management function, but in this particular function, I'm operating at a strategy level. So based on the work you're doing in that moment, or the type of standard in which you're at, you might move from direct service to management, strategy, or back and forth. If you're at a small campus where you're a team of 5 or 6, I guarantee that a lot of your team members are going to be jumping back and forth from direct service to management to strategy. And so that's to really guide you as you're making decisions and thinking about things. Where do I need to operate? Okay, so let's talk about the outline of the document and where you're going to find what, how it's organized. So the first area is really foundations. Our foundations area are topics that really cross among a variety of functional areas. So for example, departmental mission is foundation to the work you're going to do in all of your department, in business operations, in facilities management, in res learn, in IT, in hiring. Your departmental mission should play into all of that. Ethics plays into each of those different areas. Justice, equity, diversity, inclusion, and accessibility, what I call JEDI, Those things cross all of those different areas. So they're going to be found in your foundations areas. We also included some broad areas around legal issues and compliance versus what are the legal issues in business, what are the legal issues in IT. You'll find that in those areas, but we also thought there was some culminating, overarching legal issues and compliance issues that fit there. And then organizational learning, how do you operate and learn and change management across your organization? And then how are you doing research, assessment, and evaluation across your department or your division? So you're going to find that in the foundations areas. From there, we're going to start going into what I would call our functional areas. So you might, within your overarching division or department, have departments to have areas that specialize in each of those different areas, or there might be some overlap. But these are specific areas that we would traditionally break out housing and residence life. So if you think about it, traditionally you might say, well, there's housing facilities, there's custodial, there's maintenance, there's housing contracts, there's the Resler live-in staff team, there's the people that manage our computers. That's what the functional areas are. So the first functional area is the overarching category, student learning and development. The areas you're going to find there are things around student behavior expectations. How do you manage crisis response and really crisis response that impacts students? Mental health crisis, behavioral issues, violations, conduct type issues. You're going to find that in student learning and development. You're going to find your educational initiatives and partnerships, living learning, or your residential curriculum model, the programming model, student development and how you use student development model in your department, and then those student organizations. Think your Residence Hall Association, your National Residence Hall Honorary, if you do hall councils, other student leadership and advising. That's all going to be found in student learning and development. So if you're doing a review and you're a ResLearn person, you might want to flip straight there. The next one is our residential facilities area. And that's going to be anything around custodial, mechanical, the way your facilities operate, and how you purchase or do capital planning around those facilities. So you're going to find some standards around custodial operations, around environmental health and safety, life safety, fire safety, where you store your chemicals, those sorts of things. Facilities management, so your maintenance team, how you manage work orders, your facilities planning and assessment, how you determine renovation, deferred maintenance, capital planning, how you materials handling and storage and equipment, where you inventory, where you store, how you purchase those things, partnerships with facilities teams on campus, partnerships with environmental health and safety, the ways in which you do purchasing and procurement around facilities. How do you buy chemicals? How do you do an RFP for architectural services? And then sustainability and regenerative practices, LEED certification, uh, composting, recycling. All of those sorts of behaviors or standards are going to be found under residential facilities. So if that's the areas you work in, that's where you're going to want to look. Business management or business operations is going to be more than just fiscal resources. So I want to make sure you're aware of that. We really lumped in your administrative team. So think staff assistant, administrative support, the way in which you manage your office, conference and event planning services. So if you oversee those areas, how do you manage conference services, how you plan for that, fiscal resources and control, how you set up your budget, your accounting principles, your budget reconciliation, how you bill for student rooms or other income, how you charge expenses. We put information technology. So if you manage your ResLife network, your computers, the software that you purchase, those things will be there. If you have a marketing, communication, branding, engagement, that team, that type of work, how you sell the student experience within your Housing Res Life program, that's going to be within your business management area. Occupancy and property management, how you manage assignments, contracting, leases, conferences, special groups that develop contractual relationships to live with you, and then purchasing and procurement for everything else that's not facilities. Human resources is really how you manage your talent and talent acquisition. So that staff recruitment and retention, staff recruitment and selection piece, how you onboard new employees, how you train them, the ways in which you supervise, support supervision, support performance management improvement. If you are part of a collective bargaining agreement or if you oversee collective bargaining, what are those labor relations standards? And then what are some standards around how you create and manage a job description? Those are things like minimum qualifications, the types of tasks that should be assigned for different levels of folks, that you're going to find all of those standards in human resources. Auxiliary partnerships is a new one this year, and we had 3 different areas for that. The first is affinity group housing. More and more of our team as their or of our organizations, as they're expanding revenue growth, are adding things like internship housing for folks who might be working in businesses around their community and may not be, for example, Ball State students. They might be from Clemson, but they're living in Muncie, Indiana and doing an internship. So if I'm housing them, that's an affinity group housing. So there's specialty groups. It might be fraternity and sorority life housing. It might be let's see, recent alumni who you're housing while they get on their feet. So affinity group housing. Specific relationships with faculty members and academic colleges. So faculty and residence programs would fall under faculty members and academic college programs. It might be having academic advising in the residence hall, those sorts of things. And then graduate school programs. Many of us work really closely with SAHI, college personnel, or other graduate school programs. And so we said, what are some good standards of working with those folks, particularly around graduate assistantships and some of those sorts of work? Public-private partnerships is another new one. So many of us are exploring or entering into public-private partnerships. So what are best practices for those? What's best practices as you're thinking about entering in those relationships around procurement and purchasing, around planning and development? So that's entering into a contractual agreement, building, managing repayment, managing stakeholder relationships. So after they're opening, what are those relationships? What is the organizational structure? How occupancy works, how contracts works, how billing works. We've created some standards around that for best practices to guide the work that we're doing. Emergency management is really around more of some facility emergency management. So what happens if there is a weather emergency that takes out 3 of our residence hall buildings? What's best practices for that? What's best practices for a power outage and ice storm for 3 days? For a data leak, for some of those major emergency responses that you're going to tie into your campus emergency response plan. So those are going to be not student emergencies or student crisis like mental health. It's going to be large scale disaster planning. Dining services. We broke that up into 2 areas. Do you have a self-operation or do you have a contract or combined operation? And so you'll see standards for both of those areas. This is one where we didn't go laser deep because we want to refer you out to external resources that really specialize in dining services, but it does give you groundwork for those things. All right, so those are the types of functional areas you're going to find in the standards. I'm going to talk about 5 more minutes and then I'm going to take all sorts of questions. So as you start looking at this document, how do we envision these being utilized with you as an institution, for individuals, and then for the association? For institutions, I want to say again, this is not meant to say, am I meeting standards? Am I accredited as a good housing program? That is not what it is. I'm not going to come along and say, yep, your program should close. You need to stay open. That is not our role. The role of this is continuous improvement. What are we doing to support our students and their success and to benefit our institution? What are our strengths? What are opportunities to improve our program? Is to help really set us up to where do we need to focus to continue to get better. It also allows us to do some benchmarking. So if we're looking at us compared to what's best practice nationally, where might I want to focus some attention? It's also to help us improve performance reviews. So for example, if there's an area where we look at and we're like, oh, we're not doing as well here as we want, great. Who are our staff in that area? What skills do we need to develop so they can better inform and better develop that area of the department? It'll help us guide professional training as well as strategic plans within our department. What processes do we need to look at? What documentation do we need to do? to improve our process, to document our process? Where do we need to focus attention? Where do we need to advocate for more financial resources so that we can do and deliver the program that our institution and our students need? And then how do we really make sure that the work that we're doing is aligned with institutional, department, and individual goals and contributions? All right, so that's institutions. Um, for extra, if you're saying, hey, we'd like somebody to come in and do an external review, this is where we think we are. It gives them a framework to provide feedback to you so you can set some plans. For individuals, we really want you to look at a couple different things. One, you can look at the competencies and say, where do I work? Oh, I work in Res Learn. I'm going to go straight to the Res Learn section, and I'm going to circle where I am. What skill sets and knowledge do I have? Oh gosh, I'm lacking knowledge in 3 or 4 different areas. I'm going to focus my professional development and my training in my free time on those areas. So it's really for self-assessment. I'm also thinking as a director, I'm going to be looking at those areas and say, oh gosh, I really want to focus on IT this year. What are the skills and knowledge that I need to put into training, professional development, and ongoing work with my team to get them where I need to be in that particular area? So it allows the department to really plan professional development, training, and career development. The other piece that I love about this is if you are enter a mid-level professional and you're like, where do I want to go for my next step? You can look and say, what are the skills and the competencies that might be needed in the next step? What do I already have? Oh, I don't have those. How do I start thinking about getting experiences that's going to set me up for that next position? That's going to set me up for what I need to be able to do. It also gives us some consistent language. So as I'm thinking about going into an interview for that next level position, what is the language? What are the types of thinking I need to be thinking about? So as they're asking questions, I'm delivering answers that are aligned with strategy positions or aligned with management positions so that I'm using the right language, using the right experiences, and using the right examples in my interviews. And then the last piece I would say, oftentimes I talk with our live-in staff who are like, man, I really love what I'm doing, but I'd really like to do star res and operations. How do I do that? Or I'd really like to explore facilities. How do I get there? Great, flip to those areas. What are the competencies and skills that are needed? Then go talk with your director and say, hey, can I get on this capital planning team? Or can I sit in on this meeting so I get exposed to it, so I get an opportunity to develop those skills? Finally, for ACUHO-I, for our association, this is going to be the framework for the overarching work of our association. It's going to help us shape the narrative as we're talking with presidents, as we're talking with government entities, as we're talking with other campus partners and vendors. This is the work of the professional association. This is the standards that we're setting up to do our work. So it's going to help us guide our advocacy, but also how we talk about our profession and the work that we do for others. I think this is going to be particularly important as we continue to get folks that are very critical of higher education and the work that we're doing right now. This gives us the language to say, this is the return on this investment. This is our value proposition, and this is the value we're adding to the work. And then finally, it allows us to craft strategies around what we're offering at professional association conferences, webinars like this, institutes, to make sure that we're helping you develop the skills or providing frameworks to develop program components that's going to set you up for success on your campus. The last thing I would say is what's coming next? First of all, dig into this document and start thinking about how it's useful. But as James said at the beginning, we're so excited. The next step is we're going to be rolling out some assessment standards so you can use this tool as an assessment for your program, as your personal assessment that's going to really help you guide and set priorities for where you're going to do the work that comes next. Look for us at a number of different areas. Look for articles and Talking Stick. Look for us at the fall conferences talking about how do I put this into work in my particular area of housing and residence life. So with that, I've got about 10 minutes left. I know James, I haven't been able to pay attention to the chat. I think James has probably been fast and furiously responding to questions, but I want to take some time so that there's any outstanding questions, feedback, thoughts that you have that I can answer one with you today. Oh, and before we launch into questions, I would be remiss to say this work, I just need to say there were so many professionals across the country, across the world that poured into this work. We had vendors that came and talked to us about their perspective. We had folks that did surveys, that did focus groups with us to provide their feedback. And then we had experts at every level of this process either review what we were coming up with, help to establish the framework that provided discussion on where we need as a profession. We had vice presidents, we had presidents, we had association members provide feedback along the way. And if you look in the document, many of those people on the committee are listed on there, but there is so much help from experts who have just had amazing careers and have great expertise that contribute to this document. James, questions?
Well, thank you. First of all, let me add to what you just said. Again, thank you so much for the work that you and all the other volunteers did. We have started a discussion thread in the online community. So along with downloading the document, there is a spot that we want to establish for people to share feedback, share comments, ask questions. As you continue to work with this, document in different ways on your campuses. That's a great place to get feedback from Amanda and a lot of the other volunteers, as well as just your colleagues from around the world. Amanda did mention that she will be doing a series of presentations at our content conferences in St. Louis in October, where it will be a chance for the people there to have conversations with their colleagues about how might you put this work into effect on your different campuses? And of course, the self-assessment guide will be coming in the near future. We have either a very polite group or a very quiet group, but I have not seen, or you did such a wonderful job with the presentation that no one has any questions whatsoever. If you could take 1 second, Amanda, and I want to go back to talking about how the association is going to use it, because again, from my own personal experience, I am the editor of the Talking Stick. I help with the journal. I am not a housing professional. I do not. Only thing I know is what I learned from working with all of our volunteer writers. By having this document, it allows me to be so much better informed to be able to go through and say, hey, does this article answer these particular questions? Does it speak to these standards? Is there something in here that this article is missing? And I know that it's missing because it's not in the article, but it is in our standards. So I know it's important. So all that being said, this will be a wonderful guiding document. And Amanda, maybe you could talk a little bit more about how you can see that working with the different groups.
Yes, yeah, absolutely. Well, I will speak from my my own perspective as a housing professional, doing this work every single day. Having led this project, I'm certainly not an expert in each of those different areas. And so what I have found is as I'm making decisions in different areas of my operation, I have found I am going back to this document regularly. Am I making decisions that's in alignment with what we've decided is best practices and standards? Oh my gosh, here's an area I didn't even think about. So for example, as I'm thinking about mobile credentials on my campus, I'm going back to the standards in IT. Am I thinking about accessibility? Am I thinking about universal design? Am I thinking about fiscal stewardship as I'm making those decisions? So as you're starting to plan new things and new programs, I think it's really important to go back to the standards to help you with your decision making. Where might I have a blind spot that I didn't even know I should be asking questions? Where might I be doing things really, really well that I have no idea that it's a strength? And for me, as I've looked back and I was like, wow, we're doing this really, really well. How can I take this to my conference, to my professional association? How can I take this to Campus Home Live and share our best practice with others? Because we're really strong in this area and I had no idea about that. So that's one area from a campus level I think is really important. From an association level, as we're working with, as the Campus Home Live Committee is working, as the regional institutes, we're going to be looking at, are we offering programs and sessions that are hitting all of these different standards and competencies? And if we're not, where are we lacking? And then who are the experts in those areas that we can go out there and tap and say, hey, come and help us with this? I think that's one area. I think another area is as we're thinking about our webinars, as we're thinking about the vendors we invite to camp to our events, Are we inviting vendors that hit on all the different areas of our work? If we're saying that IT is important, are we inviting vendors in that can help us with that? If we're saying that lead certification is important, who are the folks we're inviting into our circle to help engage us in conversations around that? And then for me, the other piece is, as an association, is advocacy. How are we taking, this is what we've said as a professional is important. So how are we making sure that the folks that are creating policy in DC and in the state level and internationally are understanding that these are the standards with which we're working, the understanding the good work that we're doing, and how when decisions are being made that are out of alignment with what we believe are important, how are we then going out and saying, hey, we need to talk with you about this? I think most recently about the FLSA threshold and how ACUHO-I was a leader in that. Did we flip to our human resource standards to say why? Why, as we're talking about that, do we need to be around the table? How are our positions different and poised to do that? So I think those are some of the ways in which I think our professional association, our department, our individuals can use this as we're moving forward.
Amanda, you just touched on one again, a couple questions that did pop up, and again, maybe you could just go dig a little bit deeper. But they did ask, how do you take this document and use it as a resource when you are speaking to your leaders, to the campus leadership? Like again, maybe you can talk about again like something specific that you've gone through on your campus. But again, how do you use this as a resource for leveraging and advocacy?
Yeah, yeah. So I have an example from the last couple of weeks. We are getting ready to launch our next a search for a vendor for our campus housing master plan for the next 10 years. And so as I was writing that request for proposals or request for qualifications, the first place I went was let me look at our facility standards and our finance standards, and let me think about the things that are in here that I want to make sure are being hit as we're developing this facilities master plan. And so then I incorporated those in my request for qualifications. Then I had to take that document and I had to sell that to my vice president for student affairs. I had to sell that to my our vice president for finance and business, our CFO. I had to sell that to my colleague in facilities planning and management. So I was able to say, here are the standards. Here's how I've built this. Is there anything that's missing, or here's why I put that in there? And there were a couple things that they were like, why did you put that particular item in there? And I was able to say, well, because this is a professional standard. And so I want to make sure that as we're developing our plan for the future, we are thinking about how we make sure that we build that so it's the strength of our program. So that's just one way that I've been able to use that to advocate for our facilities. I also use it a lot when we think about behavior management with our student staff, our living at Rosette environment, and then also how do we set up best practices with our graduate preparation programs.
Well, Amanda, thank you so much. Being aware of time and knowing that it is still early September and housing people have things to do, we will wrap this up. But again, this is just the first piece of what we hope to be many more resources rolling out because, as Amanda said from the get-go, we do not want this document to be something that you use once every other year. This is and the same is true for the association. We will not be using this, just rolling this out and then putting it away. This is something that is going to be our measuring stick. It is going to be our guiding light. All the analogies that you want to use, this is what's going to drive us and the profession forward. So thank you all for being a part of this. Thank you again to Amanda and her team. And again, if you have any questions, please reach out to us in the online community or through the ACUHO-I website. You know where to find us, and we're always here to help. Thank you very much.